delay. I'm really bad at preparing these kinds of things because I always like to prepare. I always like to put things I think of at the last minute. You know, if I prepared it a week ago, then I'm stale. But I like to have it, and I was working on this last night, and I thought of a bunch of things. I got some things last night from the Consul General at his home that I put in here last night. We had dinner at the Consul General's house. So I'm happy to see you all. Consul General, it's good to see you again. Hangeul, something named and Jane Yoon, Rosa Kim, those that have put this together. It's an honor to be here with you. My duty today is to talk about the best parts of Korea. You already had a list from Consul General Han of some of the things that Korea is #1 in. But I'm going to look at things in a little more detail, and we'll maybe look at some things that are a little different from how you do. Let's go to this thing here, and we should be up and running. So we'll talk about the Korea's first and best and unique and famous, the things that Korea is best at. Oh, I don't think about this. Come on, there it is. Okay. Korea is proud of a lot of things that it's done, and I'm going to highlight some of these. I'm going to highlight some of them that maybe you haven't thought of and haven't seen in exactly this way before. And I'm happy to be here with the Silicon Valley Korean School because they do a good job. Last year I came and I gave a presentation on the top 10 things you should know about Korea, and they put it on the internet. And it's very nicely done. And if you go to YouTube and look up top 10 things you need to know about Korea, maybe my lecture will come up. And I hope this is going to be recorded too. I think they're working on the camera. So I think this will be a useful presentation as well, I hope. My remote clicker is not working, so let's push the button here. There are a lot of things to talk about, but I think I'll talk about the things that are most famous first. And then go down. I'm going to cover a couple of things in detail, and then I'll go down and hit just a few other things just very quickly at the end. The first thing that I want to talk about is the print culture. Korea's tradition of printing, of metal movable type, and also wooden block printing. It turns out, now I've got here that the oldest printed document in the world is a document from Korea. Now, more recently we found 2 documents from China that might be older. And so we've got a little bit of a problem with whether this is the absolute oldest one or not, or whether it's the second or third oldest. According to Wikipedia, this might be the 3rd oldest document. We do have the first metal movable type comes from Korea, and we do have the oldest book printed with metal movable type is from Korea, and we have the largest collection of wood plates or wood block printing, all from Korea. Now, this is print culture. This is not just one item, but 4 items where Korea can claim to be the first or close to the first. Now that's really a remarkable thing. Now I'm going to tie this into some other things in just a minute. But on a little more detail here, the oldest printed document, although it might be the 3rd oldest, is a document from 751. It's a Buddhist scripture. I have a picture of it here in just a minute. The first metal movable type comes from the date 1231, and the oldest extant book, that means there were books that were printed earlier, but the only one that survives, the oldest book that survives, that's been printed by metal movable type, is a book from Korea. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. And then this large collection of pre-modern printing blocks is from Korea, 80,000 wooden printing blocks. The Dharani Sutra was found in the Sokga Tap. Sokga Tap means the Sokamuni Pagoda. There's a picture of it at Pulguksa. Pulguksa is perhaps the most famous temple in Korea, and the Dharani Sutra looks like this. It's only about 3 inches tall, maybe 4 inches tall, but it's a long scroll. Now, why would you print something like that? The reason is that you would roll it up, and a Buddhist monk would carry it with him. It was a prayer to be chanted, and he would carry it in his, not his pocket. They didn't have pockets in their clothes in the old days. Where did they carry it? In their sleeve. In their sleeve. They had blousy sleeves, and he would carry it in his sleeves as he would travel. And when he would stop at night at a place and want to do his prayers, he could unroll this scroll and chant the prayer as he goes along. So this is one of the oldest printed documents in Korea. This museum display picture shows a restored copy. The original has a little bit of fraying and tear along the edges because it's, after all, 1,200, 1,300 years old. This is the Dharani Sutra. And it comes from the distant pagoda in the courtyard of the Pulguksa Temple. And Pulguksa Temple is this famous temple you see. If you've seen any posters of Korea, here are some posters here on the wall. And none of these is this temple, but you very often see this temple as an example of Korean architecture and Korean culture. It's a very famous temple. It's in a lot of the calendars and a lot of the posters. But that's where that pagoda and that scroll comes from. Yes, please. Pulguksa is located in the southeast part of Korea, in the city of Gyeongju. Gyeongju was the old capital of the Shilla dynasty, and Gyeongju today is called, the whole city is called a museum without walls. The whole city is a museum. There are a lot of Buddhist temples and old artifacts. There's an astronomical observatory. There's some tombs. A lot of interesting old cultural things in Gyeongju, Korea. The second thing I want to talk about in print culture is metal movable type. Now, Koreans like to poke old Gutenberg in the eye. They like to point out that they're faster. They got printed metal movable type done 200 years before Gutenberg. And we always talk about how Gutenberg and his invention spawned the Reformation, the Industrial Revolution, etc. But Korea was 200 years ahead of Gutenberg. Now, it's true that the Korean invention did not spawn a revolution the way Gutenberg did. That's true, we have to admit that. But nonetheless, Korea had metal movable type 200 years before Gutenberg. We know this because it mentions it in one of the old history books. It's just sort of a sidelight. It's not jump up and down and scream about it. It's just we produced a book in metal movable type. Now, one reason that Korea sort of underplays this, or historically they've underplayed it, is that China had movable type before Korea. But China used ceramic fonts and wooden fonts. So when we say Korea developed the first metal movable type, the operative word is metal, because they used bronze. Koreans were very good at metallurgy. That will be another thing I'll be talking about here in just a few minutes, is Korean metallurgy. So we know that they were printing as early as 1231, perhaps even a little bit earlier than that. There is also another book that we have that is printed on wooden blocks, but it says on the wooden block that the first edition was printed in metal movable type. And then they reprinted it on wooden blocks, and we have the wooden blocks. Now, think about this. We tend, in our Western orientation of the world, think that metal movable type is a huge step forward. And of course, once Korea developed metal movable type, they wouldn't have any need to carve on wooden printing blocks. But that's actually not correct, because wooden printing blocks, to carve the whole page on one block, to carve it on wood, is in a sense better, because you can keep the wooden block forever, and you can print off another copy whenever you want to. Whereas metal movable type, because it's movable, once you finish printing it, it's gone. You only have the paper copy left. Where if you print it on a wooden block, you can go back and print it on the block over and over again. So the interplay between metal movable type and printing on wooden blocks is an interesting interplay, because one does not really replace the other. Okay? So we do have a book that was printed in movable type, but was later on wooden block. The Wikipedia page that talks about movable type talks about China having ceramic and wooden fonts, but then Korea had the first metal movable type. And then it talks about this led to the printing of the Jikji. Can you read this? Is it too small to read? The Jikji in 1377. This is the next thing I want to talk about, the third thing on our list. This is the Jikji. The Jikji is the oldest document that survives that was printed by metal movable type. it was not until 1377, so 150 years after they started metal movable types. Well, the first 150 years we've lost. They've been gone, except for the one that they reprinted on wooden blocks, you see. So the Chikji is a very famous document, and where does it survive? In France. The French own it. And the Koreans and I accused the French of stealing it, and they produced a receipt. They paid for it. A diplomat, an early French diplomat, bought the document, and I should have put the cover on here. He wrote on the cover in French, probably the oldest book printed with metal movable type, 1377. He writes it on the cover. This whole book, and he just writes it on the cover that this is probably the oldest metal movable type, and it is, and it still survives. And the French have been very cooperative with the Koreans. They loan it to Korea. Korea's made all sorts of authentic copies of it and studied it, but the French won't let it go. If they let go, they have to let everything go from their museum, and they're not about to start with the Korean text. So this Chikji is a marvelous document, and if you ever go to Korea, go to Cheongju. Cheongju is a city about 100 miles south of Korea, maybe not quite 100, maybe 80, 90 miles south of Korea, south of Seoul, and that is where this document was printed. Now there's an amazing story about this. The document says right here that it was printed in metal movable type in Cheongju, in the Cheongju County, outside the Cheongju County, at a place called Hangeul Temple. Well, to see where this happened, we should go to Hangeul Temple, right? When they discovered this, nobody knew where Hangeul Temple was. Hangeul Temple had disappeared. Now, a lot of temples have disappeared. That's not an unusual thing, because Korea used to be predominantly Buddhist, and then gradually as time went by, they became predominantly Confucian. And so Buddhism fell into disuse in some place, and a lot of Buddhist temples have disappeared. Some have turned into Confucian shrines. We have this transformation that's taken place in Korea. But they didn't know where Hangeul Temple was. And one day, on the outskirts of Cheongju, as it says, they were going to excavate some land and put in a high-rise apartment complex. If you've been to Korea, it's all high-rise apartment complexes all over the place. And they were going to put in a new apartment complex. Fortunately, Korea has a salvage archaeology law. You know what that is? That requires that any construction site, highways, railroads, factories, they have to first send in the archaeologists to see if there isn't something important there in archaeology. They call it salvage archaeology because they don't have to do a complete archaeological dig with all of the time that it takes in every place, but they have to go through quickly and just make sure that there isn't something important there. We have it in our country as well, to make sure that we're not ruining an old Indian graveyard or something like that. So we have a salvage archaeology law where you go through quickly just to see if there isn't something there. And lo and behold, as the backhoe was digging, an archaeologist was watching, and the backhoe hit something and went clunk. They pulled it out. It was about this big around. It was a drum, a temple drum, a bronze temple drum. And we have it still, and there's the big gash in it from where the backhoe hit it. And they looked at the drum, and it said, Hwang Temple. Bingo. Here's the place. And there's a chance, of course, that if you find one artifact, that maybe it was given from Hwang Temple to someone else and he lost it over here. But as they kept digging, they found a bowl that said Hwang Temple on it. And it's outside of Cheongju, so we think we found the place. Because we think we found the place, we, meaning mankind, the city of Cheongju, has actually built a museum there. And if you go to Cheongju, you should go see the museum that's dedicated to this document, to this Chikji book. What it means, Chikji means to point out directly. It's the short version of the title. The title means pointing out directly the teachings of a famous monk on Buddhism. So this text is a Buddhist text. If the next thing to do is to go to Hangeul, where there are 80,000 wood blocks. Here's a wood block for printing the Buddhist scripture. 80,000 of them. Now, on one side, you can get 2 pages. On the back side, you can get 2 pages. So with 80,000 wooden blocks, you don't have 80,000 pages. You have 4 times 80,000. How many pages is that? 320,000 pages of documents about Buddha. This is the largest collection of Buddhist scripture in the world. Okay? So here are the 4 unique things about Korea. Oh, before we go to that, here's what the vault looks like where these 80,000 wood blocks are kept. They've all got a little index mark on the end of it so you can tell where they are. And a Buddhist scholar today, not just some tourist walking in, but if you're a Buddhist scholar and you have some legitimate reason to want to look at the original text here, you can go in and you say, I want to print off pages 182 to page 188 of volume 27 or whatever, and you can go in and they'll let you do it. This is like a living Xerox machine from 800 years ago. Isn't that remarkable? See, there's the virtue of the wooden block. That if they'd done this on metal movable type, it had been gone. And you only have the paper copy. But here you've got the wooden block left. Well, these Buddhists, they're very serious about this, and they protect this very tightly. And they're talking about creating a new set of these documents in bronze. Because if wood will last for 1,000 years, bronze will last for 10,000 years. So you see what's going on here? You see the mentality of this thing? To preserve these texts. And this idea of preserving the text is a very strong concept in Korea. Here, this gives you an idea of the size of them with the monk in there pulling one of them off the shelf for you. This is the outside of that building, okay? And then this, in the far back, those 2 buildings at the far back, the rest of this is an ordinary looking Buddhist temple complex. A Buddhist temple complex has several buildings, the main hall, the main figure, but there's several other figures. But in addition to that, they've got those 2 long buildings on the back. And because this is so unique, when Korea applied for UNESCO World Heritage status, this was one of the first places that was recognized by UNESCO. So this is a marvelous place, all dedicated to the preservation of these beautiful texts. Well, we started off with print culture. We talked about 4 aspects of unique Korean print culture. One of the oldest texts printed on wooden, by wooden blocks from 751. Metal movable type. The oldest book that survived made of metal movable type, and the 80,000 wood blocks at Hwang. But this is all related to print culture, okay? Now, so what, right? You want to answer the question of what's this got to do with what? Well, the answer is this leads to printing of books. That's the purpose, is to have books. I don't know if your students know about this anymore, but there are books. They're not just an electronic copy, not just computers, but there are books. There is such a thing as a book. And books are, the purpose of books is to lead to education. Education leads to all sorts of societal progress, and among them in Korea you have democracy, you have economic development, you have all sorts of innovative products. These are all the best and the brightest out of Korea, and I'm arguing today that the foundation for this is the print culture, the books. Now, this leads us to one other interesting and unique feature of Korea, and that is Hangeul. This unique alphabet that's a true alphabet. It's not a syllabary like the Japanese, it's not Chinese characters like the Chinese, but it's a true alphabet with consonants and vowels that was invented by a king. And here's Hangeul, and there's a list of the vowels on the top and the consonants on the bottom. And it turns out that each of these shapes is a picture of how that sound is made. Now, if we had an hour, I could teach you how to read Korean. I'm serious. In an hour's time, I could teach you, because you just remember what each of the shapes look like and where your tongue is going where it makes that shape. And we do this at school. When students come in that don't know anything about the language, within the first hour, you can teach them to read. And they can read something. We actually have them sing a song. And they can sing, they don't know what it means, but they can sing, they can read, you can do it in 1 hour's time. This was invented by King Sejong, and he had a corps of advisors that helped him. One of his advisors was a man by the name of Chung In-ji. And Chung In-ji was so proud of this alphabet when they invented it, he said, "We have invented a wonderful alphabet. It doesn't take very much time to learn it. The dullest of people can learn it in a day. Bright people can learn it in the time it takes to go to the bathroom." Now, I don't know how much time you spend in the bathroom, but Chung In-ji said you can learn this alphabet in the time it takes to go to the bathroom. And I can teach it to you in an hour. I've done it before. So here we've got a unique alphabet that is celebrated as a national holiday. Do you know of any other alphabets that are celebrated as national holidays? No, only Korea. October 9th, just a few days ago. What did you do on Alphabet Day? We celebrated it at BYU, okay? It's the only alphabet where we know the name of the inventor and all these other things. I have to qualify this in just a little bit because the Cyrillic alphabet, we know who invented that, St. Cyril. There was also the Cherokee alphabet invented by Sequoyah. But those two don't qualify for all these other things we're going to talk about, okay? So that's what makes Korean unique, Korean Hangeul unique. We know the principles of its invention, why the sounds, why each letter makes the sound that it makes. This is unique to Korean. It's a picture of how you make the sound. They were inspired by the Chinese pictographs, and it should tell you something about how it operates, and so that's what they're doing. We know the date of its invention, not only October 9th, but it was 1446. So the holiday we just celebrated was what? How old is Hangeul? What was the happy birthday? 568 years we've had Hangeul, okay? And it's used by 75 million people. I had to put that up there because you could say, well, the Cherokee alphabet qualifies for some of this, but the Cherokee alphabet isn't really used by anybody, let alone 75 million people, okay? Now the Cyrillic alphabet is used by more people. You've got to give them that. But in this combination of things, the Korean alphabet is really unique. And this is a explanation. This wasn't the first proclamation. There's an older document that's a proclamation. But this one goes through and says that each of these shapes is the tongue sound, or the lip sound, or the teeth sound, or the throat sound, and explains how each of the sounds are made. If you have an hour, end of the day, I'll teach you how to read Korean, okay? Yes?
Is it correct that Hangeul is being used in other nations too?
There are a few other attempts. There's a place in Indonesia that doesn't have its own alphabet, and they're trying to use Hangeul as their alphabet. And you can use Hangeul as a phonetic script in any other language as well. As instead of IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, you can use Hangeul as a phonetic script. It has some deficiencies. There's no FV. You don't have the, an F and a V are the same sound. One is voiced and one is voiceless. And there's no voiced S. There's no Z sound. A voiced S is a Z, right? And there's no TH, either voiceless or voiced. But aside from those four items, it's really a wonderful phonetic set. And Hangeul represents the Korean language. Now be careful. Don't say that King Sejong invented the Korean language. The Korean language has always been there from caveman times way back. There's been a language. But he wrote down the alphabet or the script to pronounce the language, okay? But let's talk now about the language. We talked about the script or the alphabet. Now let's talk about the language. The language is spoken by how many people? How many people in the world speak speak Korean? And then we're going to compare it to French here in just a minute. I just gave it away on the other slide. It said 75 million people. If you Google it, that's what you do these days, right? You don't know something, you Google it. If you Google it, if you type in languages of the world, or most frequently spoken languages of the world, where does Korean rank? And more specifically, let's compare it to a language family that might be close to Korean. Where would Korean rank compared to, say, French? In the world, a lot of French speakers, right? In high school in America, we teach Spanish, German, and French. Now, fortunately, we started teaching Chinese, we're teaching Japanese, we're teaching Korean. But the big three are Spanish, German, and French. And in fact, Korean is considered an LCT. You know what that LCT is? Less commonly taught language. Korean is an LCT. French is a very common language. French used to be diplomatic language, right? No longer. Diplomats don't speak French anymore. Do you speak French? Do you? Oh, a true diplomat speaks French. Well, French used to be the diplomatic language. Now it's English. Maybe one day it'll be Korean. Well, where does Korean compare to French in the world? Well, if you Google it, here's what you come up with. I sliced this middle part. Number one, of course, is Chinese. And then you've got English, then you've got Portuguese, and you've got Bengali and some other Indian languages. But look, Korean is number 17 on this list. There are a lot of lists of this. You can Google it, you get different lists. On some of the lists, Korean's number 13, number 14. Here's number 17, but look where it stands in relation to French. There are more native speakers of Korean in this world than there are native speakers of French. I see you raise your eyebrows. And all of you should be raising your eyebrows, because this is a surprising fact. And when I tell this to Korean audiences, Koreans go, oh? There are more of us than there are of them, of the French. And so, you see, it would not be unreasonable to have Korean in our American high school curriculum. Because Korea is as important a country as is France. Now, if you disagree with that, what other things could you look at? Look at the economic power of Korea compared to France. France is ahead of Korea right now, but Korea is closing the gap, and Korea is an important trading company, or a trading country, an important country for, you know, American business and such, and for our children to get jobs in the world. And so it's as important as French. Anybody going to disagree with that? That's a pretty strong argument, isn't it? So there's another important factor about Korean. All these things then, print culture, unique alphabet, lead into, I haven't talked about Confucian ideology, and I was going to put in a slide on this, but I didn't. But just briefly, Confucianism is a very strong ideology in Korea. In fact, we like to say that if Confucius were to come back to life and visit the earth again, and he could come back to a place at a time where his principles were being practiced better than in any other place or time, he would come back to late Joseon Korea, to 17th, 18th, 19th century Korea. That's when the world saw its best Confucian country. Confucianism has great influence on Korea. I don't have slides on religion. I can do a whole thing on religion, but let me just do this. There are Christians and there are Buddhists in Korea, and they're sort of rivals. It's hard to be one and be the other at the same time, although some people try to do that. But about a third of Koreans are Christian. About a third of Koreans are Buddhist. A third and a third. What percentage of Koreans are Confucian? The other third? No. The answer is 100%. All Koreans are Confucian. All Koreans are Confucian, to one degree or another. Even Koreans who hate Confucianism are Confucian. Okay? I've run into Korean friends that tell me how bad Confucianism is. Confucianism is criticized for being too conservative, for keeping Korea from modernizing. Okay? It's because of Confucianism that the Koreans weren't prepared for the Japanese, and the Japanese took them over in 1910. Okay? So Confucianism gets the blame. But it's not unusual to have this scenario. You're talking to your friend about Confucianism, he's telling you how bad Confucianism is. You say, well, let's meet again next week and have lunch and talk about this some more. And he pulls out his notebook and says, oh, I can't meet you next week, I've got to go do the ancestor ceremonies. In other words, you can bag on Confucianism 1 minute, then the next minute you're doing something Confucian. And on the same token, shamanism does the same sort of thing in Korea. But Confucianism has great influence on Korea. So because of these three factors, the print culture, the simplicity of the alphabet, and the ideology of Confucianism, which says there's nothing better than to study. It says that in Confucianism. There's nothing more joyful than to study. They also say there's nothing more pleasant than to greet a guest who's come from afar. So this Confucian ideology all add up to the highest educational standards in the world. Korea has the highest educational performance standards in the world. They have, perhaps, I was looking for it last night, I have it in another place, but there's a place where it says on Wikipedia that Korea has the highest graduation rate from high school in the world. Now, I was looking for stats last night to verify this. There's some other stats that have it a little bit lower than Slovenia and Finland and some other places, but it's up there. It's up there. It's number one. And one statistic I've seen is that 98% of Koreans graduate from high school. Now, that's remarkable. How are you all doing in California? You're pretty close to 98. You're up there 97. Where are you? California is 76%.
And we fudged that number.
That's probably cheating, no? That counts people who do GRE within the next 10 years.
If you drop out in 10th grade, you're not in the stats.
Well, overall across the country, if you look at this website, you can find your own website. Graduation rates are between 63% in New Mexico and 86% in, who are the best ones? Utah, my state, is like California, we're at 76. So we have graduation rates that are between 60 and 80%, and Korea is at 98%. And Koreans have to pay tuition to go to high school.
Public high school.
They only have compulsory education or free education up until the 9th grade. Free till the 9th grade, but if you're going to go to high school, you've got to pay. And they still have the highest graduation rate in the world. That says something. That says something, does it not? Maybe we should do that in this country. Charge for going to high school. Maybe we'd appreciate it more if we had to pay for it. You know? But this is a remarkable thing. Now, you ask, well, 98%, aren't there some poor people, you know, difficult people that can't pay the tuition? Yes, there are people that cannot pay the tuition, but they take care of it. There are scholarships. Every school has a certain amount of fund leeway to admit students without paying for those families that are, you know, the dad has died or, you know, there's other difficulties in the family. And still, 98% graduate from high school. Now, that's high school. And I think there's a similar rate. I don't have the statistics. I can't find it right. I suppose we could for college. Because the college graduation rate is similarly very high. Now, Koreans criticize themselves. They're no better critic of Korea than the Koreans. And they point out that there's some problems in the educational system. They're very critical of their educational system. Well, something so valuable, of course you've got to be critical of it. And there are different opinions, and they fight back and forth about should we westernize or should we keep the traditional system, and it goes back and forth. There's a lot of argument about it. There's a lot of criticism about the stress of passing the exams, the suicide rate for children who don't feel they're performing as well in school. There are a lot of issues. But nonetheless, the performance rate is very, very high. And there are things that I think we in our country could learn from the Korean educational system. Okay, that's another one of the bests. Yeah, I've talked about that already. Okay. So all these things add up to one big package, I think. The print culture, the alphabet, the stress on Confucian ideology lead to the high academic standards. Well, let's look at some other items. Shift gears now. And what I'm doing is sort of like a, what is it? It's a funnel maybe, big at the beginning and it gets smaller as we go along. We spent our most of the time now on this one concept. Now we're going to spend less and less time on other, down to a snake's tail, okay? Metallurgy and politics are two issues I want to talk about next. Metallurgy. Why in the world are we going to talk about metallurgy? I don't know. I don't understand this. But Korea is really good with metal. If you go to a Korean restaurant, what kind of chopsticks are you using? Yeah, and Americans curse it because they're small and hard, but they're really good. Once you get used to them, they're really nice. Korean chopsticks are different from Chinese chopsticks, are different from Japanese chopsticks. And the rice bowls, Korean rice bowls are different from Chinese rice bowls. They're different from Japanese rice bowls. The Korean rice bowls are made of metal. Stainless steel today, bronze in the old days, but metal. Koreans developed the first metal movable type. Oh,
This is also in a gift, welcome kit.
you have it in the welcome kit. Okay. Yeah, but where's the food? Just give me chopsticks with nothing to eat with? Where's the fun of that? Yeah, here, and you've all got a sample of this, and they're wonderful. Okay, thank you. Metal movable type, we've already talked about. Koreans were the first to do this, ahead of the Chinese. The Chinese had wooden fonts, ceramic fonts, but the Koreans said, hey, let's do it with metal. And it turns out the composition of the metal is a very high quality bronze. It's a bronze alloy. Of course, bronze, of course, is copper and tin. There's also a little bit of lead, a little bit of steel, a little bit of iron, and copper, tin, lead, steel. There's one other element. There's 5 elements in this alloy. It's a very complicated alloy of bronze that is very high tech, and it's exactly the same ratio the Koreans used in making cannon. Kaboom, that don't blow up, you know. I mean, you gotta be careful what kind of cannon you make, because it can blow up in your face. And that's the same alloy that they use for the bronze, for the metal movable type. The first ironclad warships in Korea, or in the world, were from Korea. And they're called the turtle boats. And here's one picture. I could have done separate pictures of all these and stressed each one, but I just put them all on one screen. And here's a turtle-shaped boat with metal plates on the top. Now, what's the significance of that? In old warfare, the objective of your army, your navy, was not just to sink the other ship. Your objective was to take over the other ship. And so in the warfare, you would board the ship, and you would kill the sailors. Why? That's how you got paid. The way you got paid in the old days is you turn in a nose. Isn't that gross? Otherwise, how do we know you killed him? You turn in a nose. It used to be an ear. It's supposed to be a right ear. This is creepy, isn't it? You're supposed to turn in a right ear. And you know what those our soldiers would do? They'd cut off a left ear and mutilate it. Oh, that's a right ear, look. They turn in 2 ears and try to get 2 kills for one. You get 20 pieces of silver for one of these kills, and so it's a good deal. Hideyoshi, when he invaded Korea, he took these ears and noses of Koreans back to Japan. And in Kyoto, there's a mound of Korean ears and noses. It's still there. Has anybody seen it? Anybody been there? You've seen it. I'm not lying, am I? Telling the truth. That's the way you got paid in the old days. So you don't sink the other ship. You take it over, you kill the sailors and get their nose and ears and get your pay, and then that ship's now your ship. Well, if the Japanese are going to attack your ship now, and it's all covered with metal, and it's got spikes on the top of it, how are they going to get on and take over your ship and kill you? And how are they going to shoot their fire arrows and put your ship on fire when you got these metal plates on the top? You see how it works? It was very clever. And then the gold crowns. I don't know about this, but some people are saying that the first gold crown in the world was Korean. I don't know if it was the first, but it was certainly one of the best. Look how beautiful that thing is. Very ornate, gold, decorated with jade and dangling decorations on it. It's a very ornate thing. It is certainly unique and praiseworthy, remarkable in the world. So in the category of metallurgy, Korea does a lot. And I think this says a lot about modern Korea. Because if they were leading the field in the old days with certain things, then that explains why today Samsung has the most cell phones. And Korea builds the most ships. What are ships made out of? We quit building wooden ships a long time ago, right? Ships are made out of metal. And I got in the hotel last night, turned it on. What did it say? LG, life's good. The TV said life's good. What does LG stand for? Everyone in America thinks it stands for life's good because that's what the TV says. It's actually Lucky Gold Stars, 2 conglomerates by brothers, the Lucky Company and the Gold Star Company. They combined and made it LG. And life's good is just the slogan. Politics. That was metallurgy. Now politics. Historical politics, including warfare. What you should know. The basics. The best and the outstanding, okay? Korea has a 5,000 year history. That's what they say. Don't tell anybody, it's not true. But don't tell anybody. If history means written documents, the written documents only go back about 2,000 years. But the non-written documents, the archaeology goes back over 10,000 years. But just for shorthand's sake, we like to say 5,000 years. What I want to do today is reduce everything nice and simple and Sesame Street style and say this lesson is brought to you by the number 3. To understand Korean history, there are 3 kingdoms and then there are 3 dynasties. Easy peasy, okay? And here are the 3 kingdoms, Shilla, Baekje, and Goryeo, and here are the 3 dynasties, Shilla, one of the same, and Goryeo and Chosun, okay? Here are the dates for them. I'm going to emphasize this in just a minute. And actually, the 3 kingdoms, I like to ask my students, how many kingdoms were there in the 3 kingdoms period? Sounds like who's buried against whom question? No. Simple Simon question. But the answer is actually 4. There were 4 kingdoms during the 3 kingdoms period. We ignore Kaya, and we should not. Kaya was a very important kingdom. It just died 100 years before the others, before the unification. And so the first history book about Korea was called History of the 3 Kingdoms. But the 4th kingdom is an important kingdom. I haven't got time to tell you why, but if you ask about it later, I might. These are the important dates to look at, and this ties into, you can have a copy of this so you can go over it in more detail if you want to. But in the interest of time, I'm going to plow through this. And the dates I'm going to emphasize here, and that is, look at the dates of these 3 dynasties and do the math. Well, I did it for you. The Shilla dynasty, if you go from unified Shilla, it's only 270 years, but if you go through some 3 kingdoms Shilla to unified Shilla, it's 1,000 years long. Well, dang near, 8 years short of 1,000 years. That's one long dynasty. Any world history teachers here? Name me a dynasty that's older. It's hard to find. It's hard to find. Dynasties are like human lifespans. A normal dynasty is 250 years. It'll sometimes be short, 200, it'll sometimes be long, 300, but a normal dynasty, no matter where you find it, Egyptian, European, Japanese, shogunate, Chinese, it's 250 years plus or minus 50 years, most dynasties. Not in Korea. Korea has a 1,000-year dynasty, then 2 500-year dynasties. This is a remarkable fact. And what it says, let's go back to this just a minute. What it says is that Korea has a great deal of stability, a great deal of political stability. Now this flies in the face of what most Koreans will tell you. Most Koreans, when they tell you about their own history, tell you about all the chaos, all the turmoil, all the invasions, and all the warfare. That's a 20th century view that distorts the full length of Korean history. The full length of Korean history was not full of warfare, was not full of invasions. That's a 20th century point of view. And I've got an hour-long lecture on this thing alone. I don't have time to develop it right now. It flies in the face of what most Koreans will tell you, but I've got the evidence and it's true. And I'll give you just a small glimpse of that today. The first point is the fact these dynasties lasted so long. That's important. It shows a great deal of stability. Not only that, there were smooth transitions between dynasties. This is part of the other lecture, the hour-long lecture. But Kaya, when it was destroyed, was actually absorbed into the Shilla dynasty. The general who conquered Baekje and Goryeo, the Shilla general who unified Baekje and Goryeo, was a Kaya man, fighting for the Shilla army. His grandfather was a Kaya general. He was a Kaya man who was not only a general, but his sister married the king. He was right at the top of the pinnacle, and Shilla society was a very sharp, hierarchical society, and he was right at the top. Not only that, the king's daughter by his sister, married him. He married his niece, which was true of aristocracies in a lot of society. At the top, you marry cousin and niece, and that's what you do because you're at the top of society. You just can't marry some old schmo from nowhere, you know. And so the fact that Kaya was absorbed at the highest levels of Shila says something about how Korea handles warfare, how Korea handles transitions, and how one dynasty falls and the next dynasty is begun. Koryo to Shila, there was an overlap. There was an overlap of 17 years between 918 and 935, when Shila fell and Koryo was founded. This overlap was a time when Koryo was a protector of Shila against the resurgent Paekje. So basically, the Koryo people saw themselves as a continuation of the Shila people. And then when you go into the Chosun dynasty, I like to ask Korean students, when the Koryo dynasty fell and the Chosun dynasty took over, how many years of warfare did it take to do that? And the answer is 1 afternoon. You getting the significance of this? Most dynasties, when they fall into chaos and disorder. The next dynasty fights, and there's usually a period of chaos that sometimes goes for a generation, sometimes 2 or 3 generations before the next tough guy comes along and sets up the new dynasty. When the Koryo dynasty fell and the Chosun dynasty took over, it was 1 afternoon. Another measure of this is how many people died in the dynasty to dynasty transition. Usually from dynasty to dynasty, thousands. A good percentage, 10%, 20%, 30% of the people die in the warfare, in the chaos. And usually when a new dynasty takes over, the withouts take from the withs. The have-nots take from the haves. And there's slaughter of the haves and protection of the have-not, protection of the haves who slaughter the have-nots, and there's a lot of death that takes place in a transition of dynasties. How many people died between Koryo and Chosun? The answer is 4. There might have been a few more. But 4 famous people, 4 people of note, died. 2 old kings, the general who was the rival to Isangye, who set up the dynasty, and a Confucian scholar who was asked to join the new dynasty and said no. He said, I am a Confucian scholar. Confucians are loyal. I am loyal to my king. I will not join a new kingdom. There are not 2 suns in the heaven. There cannot be 2 kings on the throne. And he wrote it in a poem. He said, though I die and die again, though I die 100 deaths, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul lives on or not, my red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away. And he died. You know, if you're asked to join a coup and you refuse, you signed your own death penalty. And he did. I'll talk about that poem again in just a minute toward the end. So when Koreans tell you about all the warfare, all the invasions, and there's this shtick that Koreans like to do about, we've been invaded by everybody. Puerto Rico invaded, you know, Guatemala invaded. You get the impression that everybody's invading. It's not true. It's not true. There's chaos in the 20th century. Korea was victimized by the Japanese. They were divided by the United Nations. They were in the United States. It led to the Korean War, and Korea is still divided today. The 20th century, the 21st century, as far as this is concerned, is not a happy time for Korea. But if you can get away from the 20th century, Korea has long periods of peace. And their heroes are not their warriors. The heroes are their Confucian scholars. How do you know? Look on the money. Who's on the money? It's Confucian scholars. It's not warriors. Okay? So, that's unique about Korea. And this has led to the modern development of politics, where Korea, in the current era, has moved from a military-dominated, authoritarian-style politics to a true democracy. And I like to argue that Korea is more democratic than the United States. Whoa! How can you say such a thing? My example is this. In Korea, they're so democratic that to choose a new president of a university, they elect the president from among the faculty. I mean, that's remarkable. There is not an American university that does that. American universities, state schools, private schools, church schools, it's a board of trustees that selects the new president. In Korea, who selects the new president? Democratic election of the faculty. That's remarkable. So that's my evidence that Korea is more democratic than the United States is, even today. Okay. Now, I told you that we did a bunch of things slowly at the beginning, now we're going to do a bunch of things very, very quickly. These are all unique and wonderful things about Korea. Celadon, literature, music, entertainment, industrial success, international politics, food, environmental policy, and poetry. You ready? Fasten your seatbelts. Here we go. Celadon. Korea has some of the most beautiful ceramic in the world. It's called Celadon. It's world class. It's among the best. Literature. I don't know what to say about this. I teach literature. But Korea has really strange literature. It's not that it's bad or anything, but the thing that's really interesting about it is very interesting. There's love stories, there are fantasies, there are fables, there are animals talking, there are magic, mysteries. There are all sorts of literature out there, but we don't know who wrote it. It's almost all anonymous, which is really a strange thing. It's really something unique to Korea. At my university, when I first started teaching at BYU, in the Humanities Hall, we've got a new building now, we're part of that, but in the old hall, there was on the walls of the hall, there were two hangings, two pictures of world literature, famous world literature. And here's Victor Hugo and Les Miserables. There's Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet. There's Tolstoy, there's Dostoevsky, there's Brothers Karamazov, there's War and Peace, there's Dante's Inferno, there's Don Quixote's, Cervantes' Don Quixote, all the famous world, there's Dream of the Red Chamber from China, there's Tale of Genji from Japan, all the famous world literature is on these portraits in the wall, in the halls. Where's Korea? Well, I went to the dean and said, hey, where's Korea? He said, you tell me what to put up, we'll put it up. I thought, well, there's Chunhyang. Who wrote it? We don't know. There's all these other famous pieces, but we don't know who wrote them. Why? Korea had this scholarly culture that scholars were serious people, and serious people don't do literature. Literature is for fun, and serious people don't put their name on fun. That's how serious these scholars were. Now, isn't that interesting? That's really an interesting thing about Korean literature. So I'll just drop that on you and let you think about it. Music. Every major orchestra in the United States and in Europe has a Korean performer. Look in the audience. Look at when you see the performances. Look, they're always a Korean-looking person. Maybe there's some Chinese, but if you see the list of names, you can see there's always a Korean there. In entertainment, look at the movie credits, especially if it's an animation. Hollywood. If you look at the movie credits at the end, there's always Korean names in there. Industrial things, this almost goes without saying. Consul General Hwang told us that the number one cell phone maker in the world, number one ship builder in the world, not number one cars, pretty good cars, and Korea is proud of its industry. Diplomatically, who's the number one diplomat in the world? It has to be Ban Ki-moon, right? It has to be Ban Ki-moon, number one diplomat in the world. So there's another one. Food. I don't know what to do with this. but you gotta give some credit for kimchi. I don't know what you do with kimchi. A friend of mine teaches Japanese. And he's my department chair, in fact. And he had a trip to Korea just a month ago. And he came back saying, oh, that food is so good. I've always heard people say kimchi, kimchi, kimchi. But, kimchi and rice, it's okay. I didn't get excited about it. He said, but kimchi and samgyeopsal. You get the right meat, barbecued meat, either bulgogi or samgyeopsal, the pork, and the kimchi, it just matches just right. It's just perfect. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say about kimchi. Environmental policy. This is the one I added last night. The Consul General's house last night, he talked about Korea is unique in its environmental approach, and I threw this slide in. And it's absolutely true. When I was in Korea in the 60s and 70s, you could walk across the Han River. It was so polluted. Junk floating in the Han River because Korea was industrializing. Industry first. We got to get the industry going. And then Korea said, well, look at what we're doing. Look, we're polluting our own planet. and they decided to clean up the Han. So they made all these policies and laws, no polluting the Han. And then they test it, and they find some pollutant. They track it upstream and up to some tributary and find the factory that was dumping it, and find them. They were serious about it. And now you can swim in the Han. It used to be you couldn't, you could almost walk across the Han. Now you can swim in it. They have, what do you call it? Windsurfers on the Han, and water skiers on the Han. The Han is cleaned up. And it's true of the air. Now, Seoul's a big city, and there's a lot of cars and such. It's not, the cleanest city in the world for air, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And it's really wonderful that Korea's taken their environmental challenges seriously. Poetry. Okay. Korea has a unique form of poetry, and there's a group of us, David McCann at Harvard, there's the Sejong Cultural Society in Chicago, who are pushing Shijo. Japan is beating our socks off. We Koreans are always fighting Japan, right? Japan is beating our socks off in Americanization of Japanese poetry. What is it? Haiku. Everybody knows haiku. American kids write haiku. Korean kids don't know haiku from hole in the ground. Koreans don't study haiku, but American kids do. And we used to teach haiku in high school. Now we teach high school in the 3rd and 4th grade. Well, Shijo is like haiku. It's a 3-line poem, but a little more complicated structure. So it's the next natural step beyond haiku. So we ought to be teaching Shijo. And here's a good one. Though I die, and die again, though I die 100 deaths, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul lives on or not, my red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away. That is a Shijo. And there are lots of other ones. There are romantic ones, there are poems about nature. I have my students write Shijo. They have to write it in both Korean and English. And there's the Sejong Cultural Society. Do you know the Sejong Cultural Society in Chicago? They have a Shijo contest every year, and the winners are not Korean kids. They're American kids from all over the country. Google it. Sejong Cultural Society Shijo Contest. And have your kids enter the contest. They might win big money. And again, they might not. Okay. And finally, I want to talk about Hallyu and K-pop. When I first heard about Hallyu, big deal, it's pop culture, it's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. I do real culture, I do literature, I do history. I don't do this silly ephemeral. I thought it was ephemeral, it's here today, gone tomorrow. But I have changed. K-pop, I think, has tremendous political importance. And I don't have it on the slides here right now, but North Korea is trying to copy South Korean K-pop. And they ain't doing it. Maybe we can find this later on. There's a video of North Korean K-pop. And it's got 5 girls, beautiful girls, in these sheath dresses, all different colors. And they're singing a kind of an upbeat song, upbeat for North Korea. And the words are, let's study, let's study, let's study. For the sake of our country, let's study. They even propagandize their K-pop copy. My theory is this, that North Korea can isolate itself and can say, economically, we're going to be poor, but ideologically, we're pure. They can do that. But South Korean kids are cool. You're going to want that. And it might just be that K-pop brings down the bamboo curtain and will be ultimately responsible for the unification of Korea. Just a wild theory of mine, but watch and see. I mean, this stuff is cool. Look at those girls. Aren't they beautiful? And their music is fast and cute, and the boys are every bit as handsome, and the movies that you see, are taking over. Now, one reason why I'm taking this seriously is my enrollments at BYU at the 101 level have jumped by 20 and 30% the last 5 years. And you ask the kids, why are you interested in studying Korean? K-pop. And if it can affect the enrollments at universities, maybe it can bring about the unification of Korea. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.